We're here at the Maryland Water Monitoring Council in its 23rd year, and you all are going to tell us about your experience in attending the council conference and then your background in water monitoring.
Very good. Again, my name is Bob Shedlock, and I'm a retired U.S. Geological Survey hydrologist. I had the good fortune to be involved with the council from its inception, and I was on the original board of directors. The council was created in 1995 to promote collaboration and coordination amongst a lot of different agencies who were doing water monitoring, and to kind of promote the value of water monitoring. The board was able to convene and obtain about 12 to 15 members representing federal, state, and local agencies, and also universities, citizens monitoring groups, and other organizations that formed the board. Subsequently, the board formed a number of different subcommittees that organized workshops around topics that were very important, including like the stream monitoring network. At that time that the council formed, the stream gauge monitoring network was declining, and as a result of having a workshop and promoting that, we were able to increase the number of stream gauges. So that was a very good action. There were also workshops on reference biological conditions in streams, workshops on promoting standardization of water monitoring methods, and eventually the establishment of an annual workshop called the Stream Roundtable, where people get up there and say, what are they doing that year? Are you going to run into each other in the stream? So all that was, again, to promote collaboration and coordination, fellowship, and also trust amongst the agencies, so that people got to know each other, got to compare their methodologies, and even to the point where someone like Eric is able to come to this meeting and gain some benefit from those comparisons.
And Eric, you're more in the private sector. Could you tell us about your participation?
Actually, I work for the local county government in Anne Arundel County.
Oh, Anne Arundel County, I'm
Eric
sorry.
Michelson. Yes,
Yeah.
I'm the administrator of the county's watershed protection and restoration program. So we're involved in environmental restoration and the protection of the natural resources in Anne Arundel County. And so we come to this conference either as presenters or as observers to learn sort of the cutting edge state of the science and be able to use that information to inform our design decision making and to look at how projects that, like the kinds that we're implementing, are behaving over time.
So what kind of projects specifically could you talk about?
Sure. So we do a lot of stream and wetland restoration, which is one of the topics of monitoring and research that goes on here. We also do a tremendous amount of stormwater management, retrofit or restoration work aimed at capturing polluted runoff from the developed surfaces in the county and treating it before it gets to our local waterways. So trying to understand how those function in terms of water quality and biology. And
the first speaker for today's conference talked about the terrible flood that occurred in Ellicott City. Mm-hmm. Certainly that had an impact on your thinking, I'm sure.
Sure, especially areas that were developed historically where there wasn't as much concern for flood control or water quality. Those areas can be challenges, and one of the things that we try to do is address both water quality considerations as well as find ways to mitigate flooding to the extent that we can, because in the public's mind, to the extent that stormwater is considered an issue, it usually is around these issues of flooding as opposed to water quality. There isn't necessarily a good understanding that what runs off developed surfaces and rain events is also a pollutant to our local waterways.
And I think there was a word fluid that was used, and I think that pertains to terminology here, because there's new terminology that comes on in terms of how much rain, how much water comes down at any given time, and how that event took place that July night of 2015, I think it was, when all of a sudden you just had 6.5 inches of rain.
Yes, and that kind of an event, under the prevailing wisdom of the people that look at the climate change, is that we're going to have more of those kinds of events than we've had in the past. And so people want to be prepared for those. There's a whole range of issues that relate to flooding. There's safety, there's preservation of property. There's also how do we mitigate the effects of those, and what our speaker this morning was saying, we can mitigate some of them. Floods of that sort are difficult to mitigate, but you can try to mitigate for those, and there might be floods of lesser intensity that are more frequent that we can prepare for. You want to get this into the people's mindset.
Right.
And one of the roles of the council is a little bit of education as well as the collaboration and coordination.
I think that we, perhaps as the layman, think, well, the floodgates are opening and it's never been bigger than it was before, and in some respects that might be the case, but 1865 was pointed as being an historic year. I mean, it was worse than ever then. There
have been historic floods that have been worse.
Yeah.
Some of those, as the speaker pointed out, have been associated with big events such as Hurricane Agnes and the aftermath of that. So we'll always have those events, and you won't be able to completely mitigate those effects. And you're just going to have to, in many cases, rebuild, because if you have a city like Ellicott City, which is kind of like a mini Johnstown, Pennsylvania, it's surrounded by hillsides with rock around. There are certain major events that are going to cause a lot of damage. But if you can mitigate the more frequent, lower intensity events, that's a good outcome.
And then for the public to understand stream beds, that Tiber River, that, in Ellicott City, there were 4 actually arms to that stream that came in at one time, but because they go underground because of development, you don't necessarily know that, and the impact that a flash flood like that could have so quickly.
So in our urban areas, like you say, many times streams themselves have been put in pipes or buried under developed landscape. Even under sort of better conditions, oftentimes they're very channelized and steeply cut so that they're very effective conveyors of these storm events, as opposed to areas where you could have some attenuation of flooding or storm flows. So we've got systems that are very efficient at getting rainwater from the top of the watershed down to the bottom of the watershed, and when we have these very intense events, that can lead to flooding issues.
Natural streams that haven't been affected by humans that much basically have an anatomy to them. They have a channel where the stream normally flows when what we call base flow, the normal flows that aren't driven by vents. And then events where the stream gets out of the banks and it spreads across the floodplain. And we tend to like to build in those floodplains, but from the point of view of how the stream behaves, we have a lot fewer serious impacts when the stream can get out of its channels and spread out widely over a floodplain. So the velocity of the water moving down that valley is a lot lower. It's when you channelize them and you get these events that are pretty fast, and you channelize all the little arms, as you were saying, and get really high peaks. In urban areas, it's not the total amount of rainfall often that makes a difference, it's the intensity of the rainfall. You can have a half an inch in an urban watershed in 15 minutes that'll produce a higher peak and more damage in the stream bed than 3 inches over 3 days.
And so even though we're talking about the quality of the water, we're also talking about the quantity of the water.
Yes.
That's so important. Well, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us, and we look forward to talking more to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.